Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today to the Modern Mom's Roadmap to Balance podcast. Our guest today is Ana Lopez. She is a proud Latina sexologist and certified sex and life coach. Ana teaches women to have mind-blowing sex on demand. She utilizes her background in therapy, cutting-edge research, and coaching techniques to aid women in getting to the root of their sexual frustrations while teaching them to utilize the only pleasure tool they will ever need, the mind. Welcome, Ana. Thanks so much for
Hi.
being here.
Yeah, of course. I'm super excited.
So, everyone that comes onto the podcast, I always ask them this question, which is, what is your definition of a balanced life?
Oh, I felt like I knew this question was coming, and it also feels very loaded.
It
Yeah, for
is. This is why
me,
I ask
balance.
everyone.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Okay. I think for me, most recently, it has been, I actually think about this question a lot, which is fascinating.
Mm,
To me, it means like everything being in harmony. So I'm of the belief
mm,
that like I can prioritize myself, and that doesn't mean that I'm forgetting about my family. That doesn't mean like I
mm,
have a really big family. I
mhm,
that doesn't mean that I'm forgetting about like my homework because I'm also a student, right? That doesn't mean that I'm
mm,
forgetting about any of the other things that are important to me. And so for me, it really means like more so like harmony than balance. So like
mm.
maybe today school takes priority, but tomorrow that means that I'm spending time with my partner, with my family, and really, for me, it's really about recognizing that not everything can have my attention at all times, and it's not going to
Mm,
be completely even at all times, right? Like I think when I think of balance, I think of like the scale that has like the two sides. And to me, that
yeah.
is like a helpful image in the sense of like, I don't want to be after that. Like, if my knock on wood, like if my mom is sick, for example, I want to be there for her. If
Mm,
that means I'm turning in something late for school, if that means I'm not hanging out with my friends or, whatever, like really recognizing what is the priority in the moment. And that doesn't
mm.
mean that nothing else is a priority. It's just about that moment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's really awesome or it's a really great point because balance is never that image of balancing the scales
Hmm.
because that's not really, what is the word, realistic to have that kind of balance all of the time. So it's picking and choosing what points in our life are we wanting to balance? What points in our lives are we wanting to prioritize and balancing in those areas, not necessarily everything in our life being equally balanced out.
Totally.
So, can you talk about more of what is a sex coach? What do you do? How do you help women?
Yeah, I love this question because I'm always like, well, it depends. And the reason for that is because like you ask 10 different sex coaches and they will all have like
Mm-hmm.
different answers. So basically
Yeah.
what I do as a sex coach is
Yes.
I work predominantly with Latina women around like their cultural narratives, so cultural messages that they've received around sex. So we're really like
Mm,
deconstructing that. There's like this very I don't know, what do you call it? Hype word. Like this word that's coming out a lot is like decolonization. So it's really about
oh, yes.
getting back to our roots. It's really about understanding the messages that we've received that aren't necessarily true, right? And
Mm,
really figuring out what is it that you believe as an adult woman that is having sex. And then I work a lot with them about what are your thoughts about yourself? What are your thoughts about sex? What are your
mm,
thoughts about your partner? And really figuring out like, are those thoughts serving you or not? So it's very similar if
mhm.
anyone has ever been to therapy. It's very similar to like cognitive behavioral therapy with like a dash of like um Latin flavor thrown in.
Talk more about that. Like, how do you bring in what is this Latin flavor?
Yeah, totally. So it's really talking about like cultural messages that we receive. And
Mm,
so talking about like the I guess for lack of better term, like the dichotomy between like, you were raised in a Latino household, you receive specific messages around
mm,
sex. So like it's very common, for example, for us not to leave the house until we're married.
yeah.
We're told that like basically just don't get pregnant. But then we're also told like wait until marriage to have sex. So it's like those are
Yeah.
very mixed messages. And then we
Yeah.
get entirely different messages. There is some overlap in this, like growing up in the States. So for those of us that have been raised in the States, we're often presented
Mhm.
with different messages. And as a Latina, we're also receiving messages about like what it means supposedly to be a Latina, right? Like we're spicy and
Mhm.
exotic and who knows
Yeah.
what else, right? And so
Oh,
it
yeah.
can be really confusing, and for anyone, right, of like any culture to receive like a bunch of different messages. And what happens is that oftentimes we aren't given permission as children to ask questions. And so we just
Mhm.
kind of assume that what we were told is true, right? It's like blissful ignorance in a sense that we're just like walking around of like, oh yeah, like this is what it is. And we don't really think too much about it. And so I really don't like this term, but I don't know what else to call it. Like in the coaching container, it's really about like figuring out, well, what are those things? What are the messages that you receive? Like, do you
Mhm.
believe those or not? Like, what is it that you believe? Giving them the opportunity to figure out, like, what do you actually think about this? And I
Yeah.
think I'm assuming that a majority of moms listen to this podcast. And I think that's also something that is very common amongst moms, like not giving yourself the opportunity to actually think about something and give it the
Yeah.
space to like figure it out, right? Like, what is it that
Mhm.
I actually think? There's a lot of messaging giving to moms in the same way that my clients are getting cultural messages, right? All the time.
Yeah.
Moms are,
Yeah.
I hear it all the time, and I'm not even a mom, right? Like, this messaging of like what moms should be and what they're not supposed to do, and
Mhm.
this is good parenting, this is bad parenting, like all
Yeah.
of that stuff. It's exhausting, and I'm not even like really I'm not the target audience here, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
exhausting. And then you're not giving yourself space to be like, well, what do I believe? Maybe these people
Mhm.
are saying that this is bad parenting or this is good parenting or whatever, but what do I believe and what is true for me?
Mhm. Yeah. And just in terms of being able to have the space to talk about sex in general, because I really don't think it's talked about enough, which is one of the reasons why I wanted you on, because I want people to hear what it's like to have an open discussion about sex, because it's not dirty. Like you said, these are messages that have been passed down to us. I
Mhm.
meant to message I meant to mention this before we started recording, but I'm also Latina. My name may not suggest that, but my dad was half Mexican, half German. My mom was
Oh my
full
gosh, I'm Mexican and
Mexican.
German too.
Oh, really? I knew
That's so
that
great.
I knew we were gonna have something in common. It wasn't Texas, but it's our heritage.
Yeah.
And so, like, even growing up, my name was Kayla Mayer, which is which is not doesn't sound Latino either. But I wanted to point that out because I completely get what you're saying in terms of all of these messages, because that's how I grew up too. The messages around sex was that you shouldn't have sex until you're married and don't get pregnant. Like that's why I was laughing when you were saying that. That was literally the message. Or maybe my mom thought she was giving me a different message, but that's what I took. That's
Mhm.
what I took from it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what I often tell my clients is that like those messages in and of themselves, like by themselves, are not bad. If your belief is that someone should not get pregnant or have sex until marriage, that in and of
Mhm.
itself is not bad. What is bad is the way that it is like taught, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just kind of thrown at you. There's no context given. There's no discussion about why it is that you're actually saying this, right? And
Mhm. Yeah.
if you ask the parent who is the person giving the message, it's like, well, we go to church and this is what we believe and all that. Well, why didn't you tell your child that, right? If they're old enough to receive the message, they're also old enough to receive the context. And I truly believe that
Mhm.
if a child is old enough to ask, then they are old enough to receive age appropriate answers and
Mm.
honest answers, not just some like shit that you're making up off the top of your head, right?
Yeah.
Like share with them in a way that they understand. And
Mhm.
so instead of you being raised to believe like, okay, our beliefs as like Christians or, Catholics, whatever, that we don't have sex until marriage because this is our belief. It's really like, oh, sex is bad. Like that is because there's no context given, then your like
Yeah.
malleable child brain interprets that
Mhm.
as like, oh, sex bad. Okay. And what I tell my clients
Yeah.
is like, you get to 18 and you become an adult, supposedly. This light switch doesn't flip where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. Like you don't
No,
decouple
I get
all of these
it.
interpretations that you made, right? Like
Yeah.
you hold on to it. And so many, I've heard this from so many people. I'm like astounded every time I hear it. But it's like, I feel like I'm going to get in trouble when I have sex with my husband. Even
Mm,
though I'm now married, I feel like I'm
yeah.
going to get in trouble. And it causes a lot of angst while people are having sex and even outside of that. And it causes a lot of rifts in the relationship. And it has nothing
Hmm.
to do with their partner or anything like that. It's really just like they're hearing like their mom in the back of their head or like, oh, someone
Oh,
going to
yeah.
barge in. Right. And it really
Hmm.
negatively impacts your sex life. And so I love talking about these nuanced things. So, like, yes, I love talking about sex. I think we need to talk about it more. Is exactly why I do what I do. And there's a lot of nuance that we don't even think
Yeah.
about that impacts our sex lives like every single day.
Hmm. Even in even in terms of the if you're saying for religious purposes, like even if that is not explained on a deeper level or on and that's even saying if whoever is giving you this information has that information, right? Because a lot of the
Mhm.
times what was given to our parents was passed down from their
Right.
parents, was passed
Hmm.
down from their parents, if anything at all, right?
Yeah.
That's assuming they even got messages. That's assuming they're
Yeah.
not just like trying to think of something to say to keep us safe, right? And so I struggled with this in terms of myself because on one hand, I was upset. Like, I wish I had a better like sex education overall, not just the scare tactics of STDs and don't have sex. What is that called? Abstinence. But like my family gave me the information that they had.
Mhm.
And so I had to come to terms with it. It wasn't their fault. They weren't doing this intentionally. That's just all they knew and had. That's all the
Hmm.
information that they had.
Totally.
And going back to what I was originally saying in terms of the religious aspect is even that can be harming in terms of purity culture and just thinking of like my own struggles in having like intimacy and sex and in my relationship with my husband was being able to explore different different things in terms of sex felt icky because of like what is considered good and bad, right? What is considered okay and not okay, or what's devious. And that's something that I had to work through in terms of my mindset about sex and what I was okay with. I love that you're saying like what are you okay with? What does this mean to you? Not what does this mean based on these messages that you've received over time?
Yeah, totally. And that's why I always start with my clients about talking about like, well, okay, what is it that you believe? Like, let's decipher out, right? It's almost like we're organizing their mind, right? Like, whose
Mhm.
thoughts are these? Whose thoughts do these belong to, right? Like, what do you believe? And really getting clear on that. Because a lot of us, myself included, sometimes are like going into scenarios where we're not even quite sure what we believe, but we're trying to like come
Mhm.
to a resolution or we're trying to fix things when you're not even really clear about what it is that you think. And so I try to really empower my clients and like anyone that I talk to, like get clear on what you think first. There's like this common
Yeah.
misconception that we need like more information and all of this. That's just going to confuse you even more, right? Like I'm all for going and getting properly educated and learning from reputable sources. Like that is great. I'm an academic myself. And if you are already inundated, which most of us are, with societal messaging and messaging that we got from parents, church, school, like
Yeah.
whoever, you already have enough information. Like let's clear that out first. Let's get clear on what it is
Mhm.
that you think. You can add in the other information later because
Yeah.
I was going to say I'm willing to bet, but no, this is what I believe. So I'm just going to say it. Is that I think a vast majority of sexual problems stem from that. Is us not
Mm.
knowing what it is that we believe and kind of oscillating back and forth between like, well, this source says this and this source says this and mommy says this and like and
Yeah.
going back and forth and really not being clear on what it is that we believe, where we stand, and then we're trying to get more information from like outside sources, which is just
Mm,
making it even more complicated. We actually don't
yeah.
need more in order to solve our resolutions, which is totally like a whole capitalistic thing that's another conversation for another day. But really, like we already have what we need, and it's just about
Hmm.
utilizing it.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing too is we don't need more information. We need more permission,
Yes.
right? We need more permission to explore, explore our desires, explore our bodies, explore whatever we want sex to look like for us. Being given permission to explore those things because the information isn't necessarily going to help with that. It's the
Mhm.
permission that's needed. Permission to push back on all of these things we've already been educated on.
Yeah, it's like I don't know if this is the term you were looking for. It's like critical thinking. Like we're not we haven't given ourselves the opportunity to critically think a lot of
Hmm.
times. So then it's almost like we don't know how. And so we're just like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And just kind of like holding on to it. It's like this blissful ignorance, right? And
Yeah.
it's really about learning that skill of like questioning it, not because, you're being inundated with like lies or anything like that, but it's like, well, what do you think about this?
Hmm. Yeah. One of the things that was mentioned is you help women use the power of their mind. Can you
Mhm.
talk more about that?
Yeah, totally. So I believe that there's only three things that you need to, I always say orgasm because that I feel like that's what like majorly people are after, but I really talk about it like having pleasure, right?
Hmm.
Anytime that you want. And I truly believe that
Yeah.
that comes from yourself. But when we talk
Mm,
about, having pleasure during sex, I really think that you only need three things. And that is to learn how to effectively communicate. That means that you understand your body. And that also means that you're able to relax and also rejuvenate.
mhm.
And notice how like none
Yeah.
of those things necessarily have to do with sex because again,
Yeah.
it
No.
comes back to like things that you already have, right? So when I
Yeah.
say effectively communicate, it's not about like convincing your partner or manipulating your partner, right? It's really about how can I get clear on what it is that I'm
Mhm.
saying and understand what I'm saying in order to get it across. Because again, most of us are
Yeah.
having conversations where we're not quite sure what we think, and then we're trying to
Yeah.
have a conversation with someone and wonder why it's not going anywhere, right? Um,
Yeah.
when it comes to understanding your body, like yes, understanding what you like and don't like during sex, which
Mhm.
I'm just going to throw this out there that you all do know. You just haven't given yourself permission to like point it out, and you've been led to
Yeah.
believe that you need something outside of you. But I digress.
Mhm.
um, and
Or even thinking about what my partner would think about me if I requested this.
yes,
What are they
definitely.
going to like? Are they going to look at me bad? Are they going to think I'm weird? Or are they going to think I'm
Hmm.
some like I'm gross? Or you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And so it's understanding your body, like in the sexual sense of like, what do I like? What do I not like? All of those things. But it's also understanding your body outside of a sexual scene. So are you aware of like where you are in your cycle? Are you aware of how your body reacts during
Hmm.
your cycle? Like, are you super sensitive sometimes? And that's why you don't want to have sex. Maybe you're like feeling really bloated and that's why you don't want to have sex, but really being able
Hmm.
to understand your body in that way so that you can have these open and honest conversations with your partner, like have the effective communication, right? First, it's
Yeah.
about understanding what's going on in your body.
Hmm.
Um, and also getting help when you need it, right? Like if you have an infection, for example, like being able to recognize, oh yeah, something is off. I need to go and see a medical professional, or I'm having pain. Maybe I need to go see a pelvic
Yeah.
floor therapist or what have you.
Hmm.
And then the last component is the rest and rejuvenation. And that is really like allowing yourselves to rest, which I think is
Mm.
probably like the hardest for most women, is this
Yeah.
ability to relax without feeling anxious at the same time, right? Most of us, we're like, okay, yeah, we can sit down for 5 minutes, but then we're like super anxious. So we get up and clean and like do all these other things, right? And so it's
Yeah.
really about building that skill where we can rest without feeling super anxious or like we're going to have a panic attack while we do it. And then also rejuvenation, which I see as something different from rest. That
Mm.
is really like, for lack of better term, like refilling your cup, right? Super cliche, but really about like giving yourself energy, right? So I like to think
Yeah.
about it in terms of like cars. I don't know why. I don't
Mm.
even really, I'm not into cars, but anyways. So I think of rest as like, okay, you have your car parked in the garage, whatever. It's not going anywhere. It's just hanging out, not doing anything. That is the
Yeah.
rest. That is you not working. That is
Hmm.
you not thinking about work, right? It's just you doing whatever that doesn't involve work. That's your rest,
Hmm.
right? The rejuvenation is you putting gas in the car, right?
Mm.
So, sure, you can rest, but at some point, you're also going to need that gas. You're going to need to rejuvenate. So, you
Oh,
can
yeah.
not work after 5 and then like not work again until, 9 the next day. But
Hmm.
after a while, you're going to need to rejuvenate. You're going to need that gas. So, it's really the combination of both.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, adding those in. I feel like I answered your question, but I'm not sure.
Yes. No, you did. You did. And I really like that car analogy because I even see it as not even just the gas, but you have to wash your car at some point. At some
Yeah.
point, people wash their cars. Even
Yeah.
if you're a person who, like me, I like almost never wash it like once, maybe not even like once a quarter.
Hmm.
Um, or you have to wash your car, you have to get the oil changed. Like there's lots of things that we have to do to keep our car maintained.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we need to do for ourselves too. It's not just like having it out there parked because I don't know why I know so much about cars right now, but if you don't know this, if you just leave a car parked sitting and you try it, maybe it's been like a week or two, if you try and go start it, the battery might be dead.
Yes.
You might not have enough fuel because you weren't driving it regularly to make sure like, oh, I might need to fill the gas or not. There's lots of things that might happen to your vehicle if it just sits parked.
Yes. Yeah.
And the
And
same thing is going to happen for you.
definitely. Yeah. And yeah, all of a sudden I know about cars. Um, I'm thinking about, I remember I used to have a neighbor that had a show car and
Mm,
he would even like, even though it didn't drive anywhere, it always went on what are those called? Trailers, right? Like he
yeah.
didn't drive it anywhere, so he never started the engine. And there's reasons for that, but this is not the episode for that. But he still, yes, it wasn't driving anywhere, it wasn't going anywhere, it was covered, but he was still washing it and caring for it, right? Because it can deteriorate just like the body
Mm,
can. And I think there's
yeah.
this messaging that we receive of like, well, we're supposed to put our kids first, we're supposed to put our husbands or our partners first, and like we'll get to ourselves. But the problem is everybody else always has needs because everybody always has
Yeah.
needs, and then we never get to
Hmm.
ourselves. And what I like to offer and what I will offer to those listening is that I want to like flip the script here. Like when you put yourself first, you are actually
Hmm.
also at the same time putting your family and your loved ones first as well, because they are getting the best version of you. If you're constantly tired, constantly like under eating, overeating, like whatever it is, and feeling like shit, then
Hmm.
you are going to be short with your kids. You're going to be short with your mom and dad, your partner, whoever it is, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not going to be able to actually answer. That turns into like you maybe you're like yelling at your kids or like whatever it is, right? You don't show up in a way that you would like. And then it ends up like you notice that you're doing it and then you judge yourself and you like try to stop,
Hmm.
but you're already at capacity. And so it's really about getting you below that capacity level, that max line.
Yeah. And one of the other things too I wanted to point out that I really like that you brought up was paying attention to your cycle. And it's more than just the 5 to 7 days that you're bleeding, it's your entire cycle. There's
Yes,
so much information that you can gain about yourself and your body and your needs by just tracking your cycle. And as moms, and as women in general, we don't need any more surprises. And tracking your cycle can give you the power to not have those surprises. Not have this extra surprise that you actually can have some power over.
definitely. Yeah. And you will, once you start tracking, you will notice like what is normal for you. And
Hmm.
that actually empowers you when you go to like the doctor, for example, right?
Yeah.
Like I always tell my clients that even if you never have sex again, like hopefully you do, right? Like I'm a sex coach. And
Yeah.
even if you never have sex again, it is important for you to understand your body in terms of your cycle, in terms of like what is normal for you, because that empowers you when you go and have a conversation with a doctor, right? Going
Mm,
back to that effective communication. If you don't know anything about your body other than like something's kind of off, I don't know what's going on, you almost have no other option than to just listen. And a doctor's
yeah.
responsibility is not to know your body. Your doctor's responsibility is to know the science. And when you go to a doctor's
Hmm.
visit, it's a collaboration. It's not like, hey, something's wrong, give me a solution. They are only giving
Yeah.
you the best guess based off of what you have shared with them. So if you're barely giving them any information, then that's what they're going to go off of and what they've seen.
Hmm.
Right. And so it's really
Yeah.
important for you to know what is normal for you. So you can kind of push back and be like, actually, you might see that this is super common, but this has never happened to me before. And I don't see why this is happening. And you can open a dialogue with your doctor.
Yeah. Hmm. Oh, yeah. And also, I mean, because of the hormone fluctuations, if you're not tracking your cycle and you just notice a change, like you're feeling very unmotivated for some reason,
Mhm.
you end up blaming yourself. Like, ugh, why do I feel this way? Why can I just, get all this stuff done that I need to do? This is so unlike me. What's wrong with me? If you were tracking your cycle, you would probably recognize that that's a normal period for you or a normal part of your cycle.
Mhm.
And if you already knew that, it would be so much easier to give yourself compassion and I just need a rest right now because that's what my body is letting me know it needs today. It's not that there's something wrong with me. That's just how my body is flowing right now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love this idea of like, I mean, that's how I provide compassion for myself, is really about just like
Mm,
understanding, and even for others, right? Really understanding and getting into almost into their brains, or like what might be happening
yeah.
for them. You mentioned earlier about your parents and like, oh, I understand why they did what they did, right? And it allows you to give people compassion when you can understand, or at least try
Hmm.
to understand where they might be coming from. And if you can do the same thing for yourself, then you're able to hold that compassion for yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What's a common reason people turn to you?
Yeah, I would say that they're like looking, what's so fascinating about this is they're like looking for something, but they don't know what it is. And so I help them get clear, like on the consultation call, I help them get clear about what it is that they're actually looking for. But the conversation usually starts something like this, like, okay, well, I've been with my partner for like X amount of years, or I haven't had a partner for X amount of years, and I'm really looking for something, but I just don't know. Like, it's just not what I want it to be. And then so then that turns into a conversation of like, okay, what is happening that you don't want to be happening? What is not happening that you want to be
Yeah.
happening? And really getting clear about what that is. And what
Mm,
I am so fascinated, I guess is the word, by the work that I do, is that oftentimes when I say that I'm a sex coach, people automatically assume that we're like getting like hot and heavy in like the coaching session. We're like talking super raunchy, and like sure, sometimes that happens, and a vast majority of the time, we're talking about how you're pissed at your husband because he didn't change the toilet paper again, and you went to the bathroom and there's no toilet paper. Really, because that really flows into
mm,
the
mhm.
bedroom, as I call it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's those things that you're not even thinking about. And it's actually a lot, for lack of a better word, I guess easier for people to talk about that than it is to talk about the
Mm,
sex. So I really like to like warm people up, and then when they're
yeah.
ready, then like they come out and I just like match their energy, right? So if they're trying to get like all hot and heavy in the conversation, like okay, like let's do it, right? But I
Yeah.
really let like my clients lead, and now I think I'm like going way off on a tangent. But anyway, yeah, it's really
No,
just
you're good.
about, it starts with them wanting something and them not knowing what it is. And the analogy that I always provide is if like your mom sent you to the store as a child, like my mom used to send me to the store all the time for random things. And she would send you alone, and you get to the store and you're like, someone's like, oh, how can I help you? Like, what can I help you get? And you're like, well, my mom said I was supposed to get this thing, but I don't know what it is. Like, you're not going to get it because you don't know what you're
Yeah.
looking for. And so really that's how all of the conversations start.
Mm, yeah. That's funny. And one of the reasons that I asked that is because I had listened, it's been a long time. It's probably been years. No. I had listened to a podcast and there was a sex therapist on, and she said sometimes she'll get wild calls because of these like assumptions that
Mhm.
people have about sex therapists. Like they think they're just there to give them more positions or like
Yes.
something,
Yes.
things like that. And that's not, she was like, that's sure I can help with that, but that's not all I do. That's not my main focus. Like
Yeah.
people can find that elsewhere. People can do a Google search and find that information because it's not the best use of my time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about us like wanting more in order to fix it. But in
Yeah.
reality, what's causing the problem is what's already there. So like let's focus on
Hmm.
that rather than you just getting into a position that you're probably not even comfortable doing in the first place.
Yeah. What do you find in terms of the the couples partners that or the not the couples. If you work with couples, you can answer the question. But in terms of the people who are in committed relationships, what has been their most common questions for you?
Yeah. So there's like this idea where like after X amount of time, which there's no one can ever give me an answer of like after what year this happens. But supposedly after X amount of time, sex should be boring or monotonous. And like that's not necessarily true. If
Hmm.
you think that's what's going to happen, then it's going to end up being a self-fulfilling
Yeah.
prophecy. But there's really
Hmm.
this fear around like, and many of my clients have been partnered for years at this point, but there's like this ongoing fear that they have of like at some point it's going to get boring and then we're going to break up and then I'm going to have to deal with like the
Hmm.
aftermath of a breakup after so many years and like all of that. And I'm always like, well, like one, who said like you get to
Yeah.
decide if it's boring or not, and like what is boring? Like you can do the same thing every single time and it not be boring. It's really just what like some people really like doing the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
and so then it just goes back to like, well, what do you want? And I always tell my clients that are in a relationship of any kind that there is like, if we're talking just about like couples, right? So two people, there's three sex
Hmm.
lives that are involved. There's like your own sex life on your own because you are a sexual being. Your partner has their
Hmm.
own sex life. And then there's the sex life that you create together. And so you can work on
Hmm.
your own sex life and really focus on your own sex life, and it can enhance the couple, how you are as a couple and vice versa. And so I
Hmm.
think like providing that distinction is really helpful for people because there's like this assumption of like, now we are a couple and we have to do everything together. And it's like, we have to have the conversations together. Otherwise, nothing's going to work. And like, that's not
Hmm.
necessarily true.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's an awesome point. And one of the things that comes to mind is like in terms of the boring piece. Even asking that, like, what do you mean by boring? Because what comes up for me is if it's boring, it's probably because your needs are not getting met and only your partner's needs are getting met. And it's about the communication piece. That goes back to the communication piece.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it was so fascinating when people are like, "Well, that's boring." And usually what they mean is we're doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm like, "Well, do you want to do this?" Like I have the same thing for breakfast almost every single day, and I am not bored
Yeah.
whatsoever. So,
Uh-huh.
it's really about like, do you think it's supposed to be boring or do you actually think that it's boring? And if you do, like that's fine, we could talk about it. But do you think it's supposed to be boring? I think is a very
Mm,
common thing as well. Like people think like this one position is supposed to solve my problems and like it's not working. And so I must be doing something
mm,
wrong. It's like maybe you just don't like doggy style or like whatever it is, right?
yeah.
Like maybe your
Yeah.
anatomy with your partner doesn't fit quite in the way that you would like,
Hmm.
right? For that position.
Ooh,
And
I
that's
love that you brought
okay.
that up. Yes, yes, because that is a huge piece. Your anatomy, like whether or not you watch porn, and if you've watched it and there are things that you're like, oh, maybe I'd like to try that, and they look like they're having a great time, that doesn't mean you're going to be having a great time
Hmm.
doing that because your body not might be able to fit those specific positions or wherever you're getting your
Hmm.
positional information from.
Totally. Yeah. So like I can quickly share on some that might be helpful.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if your partner is on the smaller end or they are on the larger end and and I just want to quickly say we are talking, assuming these are like heterosexual couples, like penis vagina type of thing.
Mhm.
So if they're on the smaller end, it can be helpful to do missionary with your legs up, because they will be able, if you want them to go deeper. It can also help if you don't want them to go as deep and they are larger on the larger end,
Mm,
that they can kind of more control the how far they go in. I would also say if your partner's on the larger end, or if you maybe you have a shorter vaginal canal, it can really be helpful and actually like quite
mm,
sexy for like you to be in control. And so whether that means you get on top or that means you're like dominating from the bottom, and really
mm,
just sharing again that effective communication, sharing when it's like
yeah.
okay to this point. And if you say it enough, eventually your partner's gonna like get a feeling, at least in the same session, of like, okay, I can go this far and she said to stop, and they're gonna know, okay, at this point I can stop and I can, remove myself. um, if you are wanting them to go deeper, doggy style can be also a great position, with the caveat that if you are voluptuous and have a big booty, it's probably not going to go in very far because it's going to get stopped, right? And so really just
Mm,
thinking about your body type. Yeah, and I'm also happy to answer, like, if someone's like, I have this body type and my partner has this body type and this is what I'm looking for, I'm happy to answer those
yeah.
questions, because I mean, I could share like a million examples, and also like it's totally dependent on body type.
Mm.
So if anybody listening is like, I have a burning question, feel free to DM me and I'll be happy to answer.
In terms of like, we're talking about body types, but what what would you give someone who's struggling with their body image and that is impacting their sex life?
Yeah, so people are gonna hate this, but I'm sorry. So I always like to throw in that caveat because I'm like, you're gonna hate this, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. Is really to like get familiar looking at yourself in the mirror, right? What
Mm,
tends to
yeah,
happen, we don't like something about us, whether it's our body or something else, and we kind of just like throw it in the shadows and like don't look at it and like, right. And shame really is bred in the shadows when we don't talk about it. So
mm,
this is why sex, politics, religion, all of those things, they're
yeah,
so taboo and there's a lot of shame wrapped in it because we don't talk about them enough. Whereas like motherhood and kids and I don't know what we're gonna have for dinner, there's not necessarily a ton of shame involved in that because we're constantly talking about it, right? We're like inundated with like all of this information about it. And so it's really about you getting used to what your body looks like,
mm,
right? You may have thoughts about
yeah,
it that it's like not pretty or it's too big or too small or whatever your thoughts are about it. But by you getting used to it, it's going to become normal. What is happening when you're like hiding it away is like, this is wrong. It's
yeah,
like almost reinforcing that belief that like, this is wrong, this is bad, this
mhm,
shouldn't be seen. I would also say that a colleague of mine talks about this as like the social media cleanse, or our social media detox, I think is what she calls it. But basically, you're going to start following different body types, right? Going to
mm,
accounts where you are seeing everything and not and actual body types, rather
yeah,
than like, oh, the sports model and whatever. And I think with ads that can be
yeah,
like kind of tricky. However, the algorithm is going to pick up on that, so start
yeah,
following accounts that are actually reflective of humanity. Go outside and look around, right, rather than like going around,
yeah,
and be very adamant when you go to the store, right? So if you're going to Target, be really adamant about the different body types that you see, right?
mhm, yeah. And even unfollowing the accounts that are giving you the anxiety around your body.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and even so it's very, I was thinking, I immediately thought of Instagram, like when you like said that, asked this question, but I'm also thinking about like even the accounts that aren't necessarily image focused, but have, so maybe if you're on Facebook or something, or maybe you just like listening to YouTube on a rolling basis or TikTok or whatever,
Mm,
and you're hearing those things or you're reading those things, right? Like, so are you reading books that are, talking about like, oh, she has like this Coca-Cola body type or like whatever it is,
mm,
right? And so really being um intentional about what you're consuming and even how you're talking about your body.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful because what I've, in terms of the clients that I've worked with, a lot of them, part of their struggle is their view of their own body
Mhm.
and having that get in the way. And then my listeners here who are moms, body image is a huge topic because of all of the changes that happen postpartum or
Definitely.
pre and postpartum throughout your pregnancy journey. Your body's changing. And once you have the baby, you don't necessarily go back to how you were before. And
Yeah.
so it's about being able to start accepting yourself as you are now,
Yeah.
not waiting to accept yourself until you're back at your pre-baby weight
Mhm.
or you've reached that fitness goal that you want to be uh trying to hit, but learning to accept yourself now and that being able to change not just your sex life, but your confidence in your
Yeah.
life overall.
Yeah. And like what I will offer, I think I have kind of like a unique perspective about this is that like when your body goes through a change, so whether it's like you gave birth or whether it's age or it's, I don't
Mhm.
know, you were in an accident or something, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a grieving process that happens. And I think oftentimes because we also don't talk about grief, so we also don't
Mm.
think about it
Yeah.
in that way of like,
Mhm.
yeah, you are grieving your pre-baby, body, right? Whatever that looked
Mhm.
like. And maybe you didn't even like it, but it's still something that you got used to. And
Yeah.
so it is a grieving process. And there's like this idea that we're supposed to go back to that, but it's like, no, we need to
Mm.
grieve it and welcome in like this new body that you have. Because no matter, even if it looks the same, you have the same weight, whatever, it's still
Mhm.
changed. Like there are changes
Yeah.
that are made on the inside that are like they're never going back, right? Even if you got
Yeah.
pregnant and like you had a miscarriage or you didn't fully go through the birth, right? Your body
Mhm.
still changed in some capacity. And so it's really
Yeah.
about grieving that pre-pregnancy body and accepting the new one at the same time, or even like one after the
Mhm.
other, right? But allowing yourself to grieve that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Anna, if someone's listening right now and they're like, I could really use her help, what is the best way that they can get in contact with you or, kind of be in your world, your circle?
Yeah, so I say all socials, but so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I mostly play on Instagram just to throw that out there
Okay.
at Sex in Spanglish. So it's Spanglish, not Spanish. My DMs are always open. So if you have
Mm.
questions, like feel free to like DM me. I think people think I'm lying when I say that, but no, really, like I love talking to y'all.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so I'd love to talk to y'all.
Awesome. And I don't know what I was going to say. I lost it. But thank you so much for joining us today and hanging out with us. I think this is going to make for a great episode.
Yeah, thank you so much.